Members, we now come to the Gambling Amendment Bill number 2. When the committee last considered this bill, we were debating part 1. The Honourable Trevor Mallard had the call and has 4 minutes and 55 seconds remaining if he wishes. So the question is, at part 1 stand part? Are there any speakers? Denise Roach.
Thank you, Mr Chair. I rise to take a call on part 1 of the Gambling Amendment Bill, which I have to say I do find it a bit intriguing. This bill was first introduced to the House in 2007 and then this came back to the House for its second reading in 2009. And in fact, just looking at the statement, the report from the Select Committee, the people who were on that committee then was Shane Ardern, Darian Fenton, Brian Connell, General Harry Dunhoven, Sandra Gowdy and Dover Samuels, Honourable Bill Dover Samuels. And Sue Bradford was the Green Party MP who was sitting in as a non-voting member. And it strikes me, sir, that quite a considerable amount of time has passed since 2009 until now. When I looked through the previous speeches, particularly in the first reading of this bill, which was like a historical investigation, sir, it did say that part of the reason for the bill, and particularly for this part as well, was around wanting to tweak the original 2003 Gambling Act because it was still fairly new at that time. It was only like 4 or 5 years into it, and there were some sort of anomalies that needed to be addressed. And so I commend the Minister, the Honourable Peter Dunn, for bringing this bill back to the House, but I do have to say there's quite a lot of time has elapsed since 2009, that second reading, and the Committee of the Whole House that we are about to address today, although I do acknowledge that it came back to the first bit of the Committee of the Whole House in July this year. So we have introduced quite a substantial number of supplementary order papers on the substantive part of the bill, and they're in the name of Kevin Haig, but I do have to note, because of the amount of time that's elapsed, the original submitter of those SOPs was actually Sue Bradford. And those supplementary order papers, actually a lot of them refer to reducing gambling harm. In particular, Clause 5 talks about authorised purpose, Clause 22 talks about increasing gambling harm prevention measures like player tracking and pre-commit cards. And I note that in the passage of the last term of Parliament, while there have been other gambling bills come through this House, none of those bills and none of the discussion we've had around them have actually succeeded yet in getting this type of gambling harm reduction measure in place. And I would hope that the Minister will be considering our SOP this time up for this bill. The bill also talks about, or our SOP talks about limiting and changing the meaning of authorised purpose so that it basically reduces the ability for the proceeds of gambling from Class 4 machines to go towards the maintenance and development of racing club infrastructure and resources, including the payment of wages and salaries, and the purchase of goods and services ancillary to this purpose, and the promoting, controlling and conducting of race meetings under the Racing Act 2003, but not including the payment of racing stakes. Sir, we don't believe that it's reasonable for one form of betting, which is Class 4 betting, to go to the pockets of those who own racehorses and who are providing the racehorses, who already get paid from the betting from that form of gambling. We don't think it's reasonable, and we certainly don't feel that it falls within the gambit of or the interpretation, or strict interpretation of what charitable purpose means, or funds that should be used for charitable purpose, because, sir, I've never really heard of a racehorse owner who was a charity case, but perhaps the Minister can define that as well. Sir, the basis of our SOPs is really around wanting to ensure that communities are able to choose whether they have gambling outlets in their communities. It also seeks to ensure that the proceeds of gambling, and let's face it, around about 40% of the proceeds of Class 4 gambling comes from people who have very limited control over their gambling habits. But we want to ensure that the proceeds of those funds are redistributed fairly. And there have been cases and cases and cases well documented in the media and throughout this House as well, and other gambling legislation, which shows that frequently there are rorts and all sorts of dodgy dealings around the... Mr Chair? Mr Chair?
Denise
Mr Chair? Thank you, Mr Chair. All sorts of rorts and dodgy dealings around the distribution of funds, and I think actually sometimes that's occasionally happened in Ohio, but the Minister may be able to comment on that as well. But Sir, we're quite concerned that we should be able to ensure that this legislation enables the fair distribution of funds from gambling, and that most of that money that comes from gambling that is to be distributed for charitable purposes should go back to the communities where that money was gambled. And so, for example, the Joker's pub in Manurewa, which actually has quite a large take from gambling, that the money from that does not go to the Otago Rugby Club, that it actually gets spent in Manurewa, because it's that poor community that actually contributes, and the people in that poor community, and particularly the people in that poor community with limited control over their gambling behaviour, that contribute those funds that are to be used for charitable purpose, Sir. We're also quite keen through our SOPs to be able to ensure that councils and local communities have more say over where gambling premises can be. Now, we've seen time after time, particularly in the places like Otara, Papatoetoe, or Tāhuhu, a prevalence of gambling clubs, well, yeah, pubs really, but they're more like pokey parlours, being positioned right near community facilities, right near liquor outlets, and these are the communities that are the ones that provide the most money to community funding from gambling proceeds, because these are the ones where there are more problem gamblers per head of population. And so we'd like to see those communities be able to have some say over whether they want these gambling facilities in their midst. And we know, Sir, that this government in the last term actually had quite an enormous, took quite a few steps towards restricting the rights of communities to have a say over things like where they can do things. But we know that in South Auckland particularly, the communities themselves are saying we want more control. And we see this in places like Otara with the Otara Action Group on alcohol and gambling, a phenomenal group who promote activities around healthy entertainment options. And I've seen them out and about, and I've seen them celebrating pokey-free bars in Manukau, for example, as a way of trying to highlight the fact that you can have a night out without actually having to be in a place that provides pokies as a form of entertainment, when all too often, Sir, that entertainment is a cause of harm and addiction in many families in those areas. Sir, we're not quite sure actually what a lot of the point of the bill was, given the period of time that's elapsed since it was introduced in 2007. And we've been assured that it's around about 25 technical amendments, and to some extent we're not opposed to them. But we do want to make the point that we could strengthen this bill by implementing the supplementary order papers in the name of my colleague Kevin Hay. And I would urge the Minister to take those on board and maybe even adopt them as his own. Thank you, Sir.